are you in a pension? Guess what? You are an investor, because that pension is invested in the stock market.
If anyone offers you that kind of deal, almost anywhere in life that isn't a pension, run a mile.
It's probably a
They're trying
scam.
to rip you off. It's a scam. But a pension really does that.
I am a freelancer, and when you look at the statistics of how much they're saving into their pensions, it's quite depressing.
What is the most powerful ingredient when it comes to investing? Not how much you put in, not whether you choose the right investment. The most powerful ingredient is time.
What a good retirement for you looks like will be different to me, will be different to Simon. But are there figures that you can say, do you know what, if you hit 200,000 by 40, you're on the right path kind of thing? Welcome to Investing Unlocked, making money make sense, with me, Georgie Frost.
And me, Simon Lambert.
And joining us today is Maike Currie, author, editor, and investment commentator with nearly 20 years' experience, and now VP of Personal Finance at PensionBee. But first, Simon, where do pensions fit in your financial priority list?
At the top.
Yeah?
Or very close to the top. I think...
And this is a man with kids?
Yep.
Yeah.
And because I would like to retire.
Yes.
I would like to enjoy my retirement. I would like to move to the mountains.
I was going to say, paint the picture for us, Simon.
I would like to travel. I would like to be able to enjoy myself.
Mhm.
And that is all going to cost money. And obviously your costs are slightly lower in retirement. But depending on what you do, you're going to be spending money elsewhere because you're not going to be spending your time at work.
Yeah.
So it has always been a priority for me. And I started saving into my work pension when I started at my employer. And I have done so ever since. And it's lucky that, because auto-enrollment didn't exist at the time.
Yeah.
And I could have made a different decision. And money's tight when you're in your early 20s and mid-20s. But I'm glad I did, because all of those years of compounding will hopefully see me to a point where I have enough to enjoy my retirement. And I also know that the responsibility is on me in a way that it wasn't on previous generations.
Absolutely right. For me, pension is my number one priority, and you know this, even beyond buying a house, because I started quite late, because I had quite a bad back injury when I was in my 20s, and my pension was an absolute disgrace. So I have really stuffed hard over the last decade into my pension. But I'm so glad you pointed out there what you want to do with that money, because I think one of the big reasons why it's quite difficult to get people to engaged with pensions is because it sounds really boring. But essentially what you're saying is, what sort of a life do you want to lead when you're no longer working? And one in the mountains snowboarding, I'll tell you what, one in the mountains snowboarding at my age now, I don't think would sound very good, but at 65, I don't think that would sound. But for you, Simon, if that's what you love, then great. Maike, welcome. Thank you very much for joining us. Just firstly, when we say that the pension landscape has changed, what do we exactly mean by that? What did it look like? What does it look like now?
Well, it's changed fundamentally, really a change that kicked off in the late 1980s. As you mentioned, final salary pension schemes. The other name for that is defined benefit pension schemes. So there was a shift in the late 80s that accelerated in the 90s. And really in the 2000s, it became irreversible to defined contribution pension schemes. A lot of private sector pension schemes that were defined benefit closed for new employees. What it means in essence is, with defined benefit pension schemes, the risk, and there are two risks when we're talking about pensions. The two risks are investment risk and longevity, how long you're going to live for. With defined benefit pension schemes, all of that risk sat with the employer. But now, today, with defined contribution schemes, which I will be in, Simon will be in, you will be in fact, most millennials, most Gen Zs, Gen Xs, everyone except probably the baby boomer generation, and not all of the baby boomer generation, but most of us will be in defined contribution pension schemes. And with those pension schemes, the risk, the investment risk and the longevity risk sits with you.
Yeah.
But it's also a psychological shift, because really under the defined benefit final salary Rolls-Royce pension schemes, psychologically people thought, when I retire, I will have a pension.
Yeah.
Now it's about thinking, I need to build a pension pot. The onus is on me.
Yeah, the risk is absolutely so much more on us. And when you talk about longevity, I assume it's no one knows how long they're going to live for, do they? So you've got that, one is, am I going to be able to save enough? And two, am I going to be able to spend without being fearful that I'm going to run out at the end of the day, right, Simon?
Yes. And this is why it's so important that people who do still get them, like public sector workers, for example, pay the money in that they need to pay in order to get the pension. So if you're offered one, take it. For the rest of us, you've got a pot of money and then you've got to try to make it last. But then you also have the problem where you need to also spend it and enjoy your retirement. And that people do veer the other way and underspend as well as overspend. And let's be honest, it's a difficult job having a pot of money at the age of 66, for example, and then trying to work out how to make that last for the rest of your life. If you are like us, financially engaged, if you are like most people and you are not financially engaged and you are not used to investing and you've just had your money in the default fund all the time or whatever, it's a really, really difficult job and a really difficult thing to get your head around.
Just be clear. I'm thinking from the perspective of a 20-year-old trying to think that far back, right? And I've just got a job. I'm going into the jobs market. I think, I've got a student loan, potentially, going to buy a house, hopefully, maybe have a family, potentially. Why am I thinking about something decades hence with a cost of living crisis going on? Are we ready for the sort of responsibility that's been put on us?
Well, I think it's fair to say that responsibility has come quicker than the education has come. So people are now expected to take responsibility for their own pensions, what they're putting in, how well those are invested, without really understanding pensions. But if you are in your 20s, the one thing you've got on your side, yes, you've got probably a finite salary, not your biggest salary, you're just starting out in your career. You've got a student loan, you probably don't want to live with your parents anymore, rent is high, dream of owning your own property. But the one thing that is on your side is time, right? So you can benefit from the power of compound interest, but you've also got to make auto enrollment, which came in 2012. And in essence, it means if you're in formal employment, your employer must contribute into a pension for you. Make the most of that, right? Because that is free money. And I always think we talk about that, but people think, well, I'm going to get less on my pay slip every month. Actually, you're getting free money because your employer is contributing, you are contributing. And when you start in your 20s, which I also did when I was in my first formal employment role, I didn't want to do it, but I did do it. And I contributed very little, but because I started at such a young age, that power of compound interest has really worked in my favor.
What do we mean because you've both talked about the power of compounding. What do we actually mean by that?
Well, the way people always describe it is think of a snowball, a bit like when Simon is in the mountains living his dream retirement.
But that's not Simon going round and round.
As I'm falling down the mountain,
That
Gathering
snowball
snow.
going down the hill, gathering more and more snow, earning interest on interest over time. And it's just exponential, right? It's just the initial sum that you put in grows, and that works in your favor, and it becomes so much easier to reach those targets. And the numbers can sometimes be quite eye-watering.
The thing that frustrates me whenever I read about pensions or listen to podcasts about pensions is it's all like, the best time to start is in your 20s. If you are in your 30s, your 40s or 50s, you're listening to that going, oh, great. All I will say to that is I didn't properly start until I was early 30s. And I know some people started later than that. You can do it. It just takes more effort.
Yes. If you invest for 40 years instead of 30 years, so the difference between maybe starting your early 20s and your early 30s, there is a neat trick that means that compounding, the gains you earn on the gains you've already made, doubles your money. Now, it's not the extra money you're paying in over those 10 years that does this. It's the returns on the returns. So that's why you should do it. But likewise, if you look at doing it over 30 rather than 20, the compounding makes a really big difference there. So if you didn't do it in your early 20s, fine, do it in your early 30s. And if you didn't do it then, do it in your early 40s. And if you didn't do it then, just do it as soon as you can. And then the other thing is the money that your employer will pay in it's the equivalent of if someone said to you, you give me £50, I'll give you £112.50 back. Say, right, great, good deal. And most employers will do more than auto-enrollment. And so most employers will match what you put in up to a certain amount. And so that's you put in £50, they put in £50, and then if you're a basic rate taxpayer, you get £12.50 in tax relief on top. So you've turned £50 into £112.50. That's a great deal. You don't get that. If anyone offers you that kind of deal, almost anywhere in life that isn't a pension, run a mile.
It's probably
they're trying
a scam.
to rip you off. It's a scam. But a pension really does that.
I am a freelancer. So what about, I think it's almost 5 million people in the UK who are freelancers. And when you look at the statistics of how much they're saving into their pensions, it's quite depressing, largely. What should they be thinking about?
Well, I think there are 2 points here, and my other half is a freelancer too, and also started contributing to his pension quite late. So we kind of got to a point where we looked at it and said, you got to turbocharge this now. You are in your late 40s, and the thing you can do then is really crank up those contributions. You've got to crank up the contributions, but obviously your income is lumpy, right? Some months are golden months, some months are really, really dire months. I think put some money aside as much as you can, and remember that self-assessment works in your favor, because that's when you can claim back. If you are earning in the higher rate tax band, you can claim back more tax relief. But you've got to think about it, because no one is looking after your retirement savings. And if you are coming to the pension game later, you've got to put more in terms of contributions. And fundamentally, think of yourself. This is the thing with defined contribution pensions. You are an investor. You have to know where that pension is invested. You need to look under the bonnet. I mean, I talk to so many people who just they don't even know where to access their pension. They don't have the password, the passcode. They don't have the app on their phone. You've got to start by getting access to it, looking what's in there, where's it invested, and then think of yourself as an investor. And I find this really interesting when I talk to groups of people. The first question I'll ask them is, are you an investor? And a few will kind of meekly put up their hands. And then my next question is, are you in a pension? And everyone raises their hand, because at some point, most people were in formal employment and they had a pension set up. And then it's my kind of drop the mic moment, which is, guess what? You are an investor, because that pension is invested in the stock market. You own a slice of the stock market, and the more you understand of it, where's it going? What's the market doing? What fees are you paying? The better results you can get from your pension.
Does that mean if we're all investors that we have to get really hands-on? Because that will make some people quite nervous.
Not necessarily, no. So this is where there's a scope, really. You get a lot of default schemes. You will be put in a workplace pension. You will be put in the default, which is designed to cater for everyone from 20 to 50, and will kind of navigate your way into retirement. And for a lot of people, that is the right option, because they don't want to become involved. But equally, in the same workplace pension scheme, there might be a few funds that are trackers, global trackers, with far lower fees, which could also be a set and forget option. And if you're self-employed and you want to go to a more digital app where you have what we'd call ready-made options, where all those investment decisions are made for you depending on your age, and you put the money into a fund and you forget about it. So there's really a scope here, and it depends on who you are and at what point you are in your life. And a lot of people come to pensions in their 40s, and at the same time, the mental load of raising families, dealing with elderly parents, all those things it can be too much, and you just don't have the mental capacity to think about where my pension's invested. You can outsource it. You can outsource those investment decisions.
I want to get back to this engagement point, because you mentioned there about how little people really know about their pensions. I was astonished to read, particularly older people, how few people actually know how much they've got. Now, one of the great things that really helped me to turbocharge my pension and to have kind of a goal to work towards was knowing how much I've got, because then I can figure out how much I need to add every month, how much extra I want to do as lump sums. And yet so many people don't even know how much they've got in their pensions. And surely that would be the first step, because a lot of people I've spoken to, certainly as a journalist, have more than they think they do, because we've probably had quite a few jobs.
Absolutely. I mean, we know that the traditional kind of shape of life, if you like, that reigns supreme in the 21st century, which is education, work, retirement, is shifting. We will have more jobs. We will have a flexible retirement. We will move in and out of retirement quite possibly. We will have phased retirements. But we could have quite a few pension pots dotted about, and bringing those together, consolidating them, could give you a clearer picture of how much you've got. But if you've got that number, if you know how much you've got in the pot, then you can work your way back to saying, this is enough for the retirement I want. And of course, a comfortable retirement will differ from me to you. And then you can do some kind of mathematical shortcuts to get you to where you need to go. There are great pension calculators online with companies like PensionBee, but also there are shortcuts. The shortcut I always say is divide by 25. So if you've got a pot, let's say you're lucky enough to have 800,000 in your pension pot, divide by 25, that's going to give you £32,000. Give or take, that is probably the annual income that you can expect from that pot. It's based on that 4% withdrawal rate, which generally speaking is seen as a safe amount to withdraw from your pension without running out of money.
So basically you're saying to get the amount less than what is the median national income, is that right? You'd have to have 800,000 in your pension pot. That seems extraordinarily high, doesn't it, Simon? And quite scary high figure. How would you get to that?
It is a high figure. And I think that there is an issue with the way that we perceive pensions in this country and the way that we have taxed pensions in the past. And somebody is considered to be extremely rich if they have that kind of pension pot. We had a lifetime allowance that was set just above £1 million. £1 million doesn't actually buy you, that lavish a retirement lifestyle. And in fact, if you compare it to the Pension UK benchmark standards, it puts you at a comfortable retirement. That's what's going to cost you for a comfortable retirement. That lifetime allowance has been removed, but now we're about to put unspent pension pots into the inheritance tax.
We still have an annual allowance, though, don't we?
You have an annual
60,000?
allowance. Yeah. To get £60,000 a year into your pension every year, you do need to be earning a lot of money, or to be shoveling a lot in from elsewhere.
No other expenditure.
Now that £60,000 does include the basic rate tax relief that you get from the government automatically when you pay money into a pension. And people often don't realise that, but you need to be earning a lot. Whereas the other way round, the actual size of the pension pot, well, it doesn't buy that, as I said, doesn't buy a lavish retirement. And now we're going to pull that into the inheritance tax net. And the danger with doing things like that is you sort of lose trust in the system and things like that. And actually, people will be pulled into the inheritance tax net whose pensions will not buy a particularly, a luxurious retirement at all. It will just buy them a pretty much standard retirement. And I think we need to shift away from this idea of pension pots as the kind of wealth in the same way we look at people's savings and investments and even their property, and just look at them as like, this is the thing that you need in order to survive in retirement because it's on you.
Absolutely. I mean, the argument, I don't want to get too much into policy and government decisions over inheritance tax and all that sort of thing, but the argument was that people are using their pensions as some sort of an inheritance tax vehicle when ultimately they're to ensure that you have a comfortable retirement until you die.
And this is true, but the number of people doing that was very, very small. And actually, it's looked at as something where you're targeting the older, richer boomer generation, but actually it's something that will affect our generation and the younger generation who are just doing what they're meant to be doing and saving into their pension from their 20s in order to build up a pot, in order to pay for their retirement.
So one thing that I was always desperate to find out when I was in sort of the early days of shoveling into my pension was, how much do I need? How much should I have at 20? How much should I have at 30, at 40? And it's actually really hard because, like you said earlier, what a good retirement for you looks like will be different to me, will be different to Simon. But are there figures that you can say, do you know what, if you hit 200,000 by 40, you're on the right path kind of thing?
What I've always found useful is something called retirement rules of thumb. And the way to think about this is, let's say I want £50,000 as an annual income when I retire. So the way to work out, am I on track to get that? If I'm 30 years old, I need at least 1 times that in my pension pot. So I need £50,000 in my pension pot. If I'm 40 years old, I need double that. 54 times and 66 times, roughly. Those are guidelines, right, that you can kind of rely on to check if you're on track. If we talk about what is the number, the golden number, the number that does come up is £800,000. Now, people often talk about this dream of
by the time you're 60,
by the time you retire. Well, I would say the caveat there is £800,000 will give you an income roughly of £32,000. Remember that we still have the state pension. And the state pension will be determined by how many years of national insurance contributions you make. To get that full state pension, which now stands at around £12,000, just a little bit over £12,000, you need 35 years of national insurance contributions, which in essence means working for 35 years.
To get any,
or getting
it's 10
those
years,
NI contributions. To get any state pension, a minimum of 10 years. But let's say you get that. So you'd add the £12,000 to the £32,000. And the idea then is if you go into retirement in your 60s, you're in a diversified pension, you're willing to adjust the income levels you take when markets take a dip, that pot should last you for the next 30 years. So these are all kind of, I would say, mathematical shortcuts.
Yeah.
They're not 100% solid because, again, what a comfortable retirement is will differ from one person to the next. It is subjective. Equally, we don't know how our retirements are going to pan out. We might be supporting our children still. We might be really active and young and want to travel a lot. So everything is subjective. Everything depends on what that retirement looks like. But you've got to be putting money into that pot. You've got to be contributing regularly, and you've got to look at where it's invested.
And do you think people overestimate as well how much they're going to need in retirement? Do they anchor on the income, the salary that they're on now, for example?
Yes.
And then they forget that there will be costs that they don't potentially have anymore. So they won't have, hopefully, they will have a home and they will paid off their mortgage. They won't, for a start, be making the pension contributions that they're making now, probably.
Absolutely.
Hopefully, they won't have quite so much expense from their children, although you can't guarantee your adult children won't be costing you much money. The commute to work, but then also the tax element where a lot of these people we're talking about are going to be paying 40% tax on a big chunk of their earnings. And if all of a sudden the income they need for their pension drops below that 40% tax threshold, they won't be losing that as well.
Absolutely. I think the way I find it really useful to think about how you would spend in retirement is this graphic that people talk about, the retirement smile. So in your early years of retirement, when you are kind of chasing that dream, like doing the things you always wanted to do, living in the mountains, going snowboarding, you're young, relatively young still, you're still active, you want to do all those things. It's also those moments of kind of it's now or never, right? Then it dips as you get older because you become less mobile and your spending will fall, and you probably will have the challenge of saying, I've actually got more money than I need to spend. And that's where we get into this thorny issue of inheritance tax. And then towards the end of your retirement, as you get into later life, it spikes again because then you've got the issue of care fee planning. You might be less mobile. You might need extra help. So retirement spending, if you like, isn't linear. It's not a straight line. It'll look something like a smile, but we do overestimate how much we need because we do kind of want to build in a buffer. Ideally, when we talk about comfortable retirement figures, and the Pension Lifetime and Savings Association, they've got some great figures on their website, but those figures assume that you don't have a mortgage, that you don't have rent, that you don't have that cost.
Exactly. And this is where that 20-year-old that I spoke about earlier is going, I can't even imagine being able to afford my own home and not having a mortgage to pay. And the reality is there probably will be lots of people who still have to rent in retirement.
Absolutely. And I think that is kind of a challenge. I think the bottom line there is, so what are you going to use to pay for that rent, right? What are you going to use? You're going to use the income from your pension pot. You cannot ignore it. We are all going to get older. That's the one thing that won't change, hopefully, touch wood. The alternative is worse. And you need to put money in. And the thing is, when you start young, kind of to the point of when we were trying to explain what is compounding, what is compound interest, just the simple way to think of it is, you are investing. We said DC pension pots are invested in the stock market. What is the most powerful ingredient when it comes to investing? Not how much you put in, not whether you choose the right investment. The most powerful ingredient is time. Time. If you've got time, it will grow. It will smooth out, and it takes that anxiety away because time will work in your favor. And actually, pensions are the ultimate investment vehicle to unlock that long-term growth of your capital. So it's a good thing it's on top of your list of priorities.
Before we carry on, a quick word from our sponsor, PensionBee. If you're listening to this podcast, chances are you care a fair bit about investing and making the most of your money. But here's the thing, you don't have to be a pensioner to care about your pension. In fact, the earlier you pay attention, the more powerful it can be. Your pension is likely to be one of, if not the biggest investments you have, yet it's often the one people ignore the longest. That's where PensionBee comes in. They're a leading online pension provider focused on helping people build confidence and take real control of their retirement savings at any stage of life. Their app and website make it easy to combine old pension pots, manage contributions flexibly, and see exactly what's happening with your money all in one place. You can also access your pension from age 55, rising to 57 from 2028. If you want to take a more active role in your pension investing, download the PensionBee app or visit their website to get started. Remember, when investing, your capital is at risk. So, if you are thinking of, getting started, or you want to take it to another level, what should you be looking for in a modern pension? Let's take a look under the bonnet, like you said. Are we looking flexibility, purely low fees, ESG, or those sorts of things, if that's the way you're inclined?
It all depends on where you are in your journey towards retirement, I guess. But what is really important is access as a start. I think it is really shameful that the pension landscape is still so antiquated and it's still so paper-based and so hard for people to actually just get in and see how much they've got in the pot. So look at the digital offerings out there because they will make life easier for you. Equally, look at fees. Fees are really important, especially if you're starting out. If you can keep them low, again, as investment returns compound, so too fees will add up. Look at the supporting material that can help you make decisions. Look at other things like cybersecurity. Do you have access to someone you can talk to if you've got questions? And also thinking ahead, is there income drawdown facility? Will it be really easy, especially if you're getting closer to retirement, to draw down this pension? Or am I going to have to transfer it because this provider that I'm with does not have that functionality? So there are various things to consider. I would always look at investment choice. Now, maybe you want choice, and something with a wide array of shares and funds is right for you. Maybe you want to make sure that volatility is managed on your behalf, but in the 21st century, it needs to be easy. There needs to be access, and there needs to be support.
What should the makeup of your pension be? We've spoken a lot about starting in your 20s, starting in your 30s. Say you're starting a little bit later. Should it be different? I mean, would 100% equities be a good idea?
A really interesting question. And if you want to turbocharge your pension, you're starting late, you've got to up the risk. So you've got to ideally be 100% in equities. This is not investment advice.
Of course.
But you've got to crank up the risk, the exposure to equities, because that's the only way you are going to get that growth.
As opposed to
bonds, having a slice in bonds or cash. And every time, and I know I do this, every time I get nervous about the state of the markets, I think maybe I should de-risk. Maybe I should put a sliver in cash. And I have done that. And I think I do it to my own detriment because I'm still some way away from retirement and I want the growth. I don't want to miss out on the growth. There will be dips, but ultimately I should be in, me personally, 100% in equities.
It can work in our favours to not be completely engaged in things, just set up a direct debit, keep things going. But actually, it really serves to take a look at what you're invested in and whether, not that you're being too risky, but that you're being not risky enough, I think.
I think that a pension is such a long-term investment. My view has always been let the stock market do the work. And by that, mine is 100% invested in the stock market. The idea of investing and de-risking it towards retirement is one that comes from when people would then take their pension pot and buy an annuity, and then that would provide them with an income for the rest of their life. Less people do that now than they did due to changes in the way pensions were structured that allowed more people to keep their pensions invested and draw on them. And also because for many years after the financial crisis, when interest rates have been cut to the floor, annuity rates are absolutely terrible. Annuity rates are actually quite good at the moment. So people who are retiring now are looking at them and going, well, and there are people who are using them for a slice of their income. There are people getting quite good deals on it. But the idea of the de-risking the pension to hit that retirement age is a bit due to an older system that doesn't exist anymore. If you're going to remain invested for years, then you can probably keep more in the stock market. Again, it's not investment advice.
Yeah.
But, that is the general view. For me, though, I think the other risk, though, is if you do have a pension that does allow you to invest absolutely anywhere. And if you've got a SIP, for example, that will be the case. You could choose.
That's just a personal pension, isn't it?
It's a self-invested personal pension, but many of them are very flexible. Will give you the opportunity to invest in all the funds and shares that you possibly can. Try to avoid being too clever. I would say just let the stock market do its work. If you do want to try to be clever, if you do want to try and pick some more unusual investments, pick some funds, pick some shares, do that with a small chunk of your pot. Most of it, just stick it in that broad global stock market tracker and trust in the ability of thousands of companies around the world to take money, put it to productive use, make a profit, and grow their share prices or pay dividends to investors. Don't get caught out by that shiny fund that you heard someone mention in an article and stick 40% of your pension in it, and then all of a sudden that fund turns out to not be the winner that it was sold to you as, and actually it's fallen by 40%, or potentially that you've fallen behind. And there are a number of very big name fund managers who have fallen a long way behind the market over the last 5 years.
In that, how do you really check performance? Like, what are you comparing it to?
So I would say, broadly speaking, you want to look against a global benchmark, right? So MSCI Global is a benchmark. Depends on where your pension is invested, but that will be on the fact sheet of the fund that you're invested in, and you will very quickly see if you're falling.
Read the literature, right?
Read the really engaging rock and roll literature that goes alongside these things, but you will very quickly pick that up. If you are investing in a ready-made fund where the asset allocation decisions have been made for you by experienced investors, you don't need to worry about that too much. If you are in a tracker, you've got to be in it in the long term. But if you're looking at that, right, and you see it's been underperforming for 5 years now, then I would make a switch. I would absolutely make a switch.
And the thing to remember about many of these ready-made funds, ready-made portfolios, or the portfolios where it's not 100% in the stock market, is what they're doing is they are managing the volatility of it as well. And this is that basically it's not going to swing around as much when the stock market does take a tumble. It's not going to spike as much when the stock market shoots up, but when the stock market shoots down, it's not going to fall as much. And that is ideal for people for whom, if they were to open their pension account and look at it and they saw that their pension fund was down 20%, they might panic and start trying to pull money out to cash, rather than it being invested. Instead of riding out the storm, they'd be worried about it. And I think if you are that kind of person, well, firstly, I would look at your pension and go, well, actually, when can I even get at this money? Because if I can't actually get at this money till I'm 57 or 58, and I'm only in my mid-30s, it doesn't make any difference to me whether it's down 20% now. And in fact, it just means that the money I'm putting in now is buying the stock market while it's on sale. But if you are closer to it and you are going to worry, then potentially you might want to look at some of those funds that will just dial it back a little bit for you. But what you're giving up is potential gains as well.
You've made a good point there. How often should you be checking your investments? Now, I quite like to look at my app most days. I know, right? It's crazy, but it's doing really well at the moment. And also, there is such a motivational thing. Honestly, it's like the B I got in physics A level. One of my proudest achievements in life is being able to have got what I've got in the small space of time that I've done it. But obviously, we don't recommend looking at your investments every day, especially if it's been a bad day on the market.
So, I mean, I like to look at my pension too. And that's where the accessibility point is so important. I've got the apps on my phone and I can just, with face recognition, get in and see what's happening. But I don't tinker with it. So there's a difference. So you like looking at it, look at it, but don't tinker with
Stroke it. Lie in bed with it.
So there's this characterization that you get of Mr. Market. Mr. Market is a nutter. Okay, it's the equivalent of
Yeah.
a man who comes round every day and just shouts numbers at you.
Right.
Okay, so imagine if that happened with your house, for example. You own your own home, right? It doesn't really matter to you how much it's. But we obsess about house prices in this country, don't we?
I've
But
got
realistically,
Zoopla alerts that tell me how much it's gone up and down.
Unless you're planning on moving, it doesn't matter. But imagine there was a man who came round to your house and he stood outside your house every day and he shouted a different number at you. So he came round today and he shouted 350,000. And then tomorrow he comes around and shouts 320,000. And then the next day he comes around and shouts 400,000. Yeah. That's the equivalent of looking at your portfolio every day. It is meaningless noise. And actually, this man would not just be coming and shouting at you once a day. He'd be shouting prices at you constantly. So just think of that scenario next time you're tempted to just be constantly looking at your investment app.
Can't get it out of my head. But at some stage, would you like to invite that chap in for a cup of tea and discuss those figures? I.e., how often should you be looking at your investments?
I think rebalancing is important as ever.
What do you mean by that?
So rebalancing, if let's say we've had an absolutely stellar year in the market, right? And your asset allocation to a certain section, a certain region has got out of kilter, then you might want to take some profits and invest it elsewhere, right? But the more you trade, the more changes you make, that costs you and it will chip away overall. But if you're going to invite the shouty man into your house,
I don't recommend this,
do it once every 6 months. I think what is more important is when that volatility happens, and we've had a really good run in markets, so we are likely to see that happen. And I don't want to make a call on it, but we are likely to see volatility spike. The most important thing you need to do when that volatility spikes is to keep your contributions, that regular investing, because actually, when the market dips, you are getting more units in whichever fund you're investing. So it works in your favor. And it's that discipline. And that's the one good thing about auto enrollment. It really looked at participation. It took the inertia away. The thing that we now need to look at is adequacy. Is it enough? Are we putting enough in? And I think a good way is to not just think about your workplace pension and not just think about the state pension. Think about 3 pots. My workplace pension, where I'm benefiting from employer contributions, my state pension, where I'm ranking up those national insurance contributions, and also having that personal pension, where I can put away something extra, and the combination of those 3 pots, they will be my retirement income one day.
Is that all you should be thinking about in terms of your retirement savings? Or is it worth having stocks and shares ISAs or cash savings?
Yeah, it is, and people should think
property.
People should think about the whole thing.
Yeah,
right. It's not just the money that they put into a pension; it's the money that they have in an ISA. For example, whether it's a stocks and shares ISA where you're getting the investment growth, or a cash ISA, and that money. The advantage of that is when you take the money out, it's tax free. When you take your money out of your pension, above the first 25% that you take out, it's going to be taxed. So that ISA is beneficial. But what you don't get is you don't get the uplift on the money that you pay into it. You don't get the tax relief. And that tax relief is a real benefit, and you don't obviously get the employer contributions that you would get from a workplace pension. The other thing to think about is, for many people, we love property in this country. If we loved pensions as much as we love property, nobody would be worried about their retirement. But in terms of, for example, buy-to-let, right, the tax situation on buy-to-let is hideous. You get charged a stamp duty. You get charged stamp duty that normal people would pay. You get charged a stamp duty surcharge. The tax on the rental income, you're taxed on your revenue, not on your profits, because you can't put all of your mortgage interest against it anymore. You will pay capital gains tax when you eventually sell that property. But even just the act of putting money into the property, the government is taking a very large sum of money off you in return for you being allowed to buy that property, to put that money in. Whereas the difference between putting money at that and putting money into a pension is if you put it into a pension, the government will give you money.
Yeah.
So just think about that when you're building a retirement pot, especially if you're someone who is more on the kind of, my property is my pension.
I have a family member who says exactly that, and it makes me very nervous. I want to talk about pension consolidation. Obviously, it was something I did, and I thought, quite seriously about it, but we're working at many, I think it's 11 is supposedly the number that we're working of different jobs. So we could have lots of different pots all over the place. And there's some extraordinary figure, like 20 billion of how much in lost pensions. It seems extraordinary that we could lose a pension and some money, but we do. So what are the pros and cons, I suppose, of consolidation? And is it hard to do?
Unfortunately, it is still harder than it needs to be. And that's because a lot of legacy providers are still very paper based. And that kind of moving a pension, transferring a pension process can take often months. And it shouldn't. You can switch banks, you can switch a broadband provider, and you can do that literally in seconds. So we are lobbying really hard for the government to improve that, for pensions to come into the 21st century, for a 10-day switch minimum, because it's a really awful feeling when you've decided to consolidate your pensions and you don't hear anything and the paperwork goes missing, right? Getting back to your question of pension consolidation, there are a load of pros to bringing your pots together. The biggest is clarity.
Mm-hmm.
You know how much you've got and you can start working around how much can I crank up my contributions? Where's it invested? And that feeling of control is really, really important. It's one thing we found that really gets people engaged because I've taken control of this situation. There is a caveat to it because a lot of older pensions have benefits, guarantees attached to them. These are really older pensions, so you've got to make sure you're not giving up any valuable guarantees. And a lot of workplace pensions have lower fees. Now, if you're just starting out, those lower fees can be beneficial, but it depends on the individual. There's no point knowing you've got some workplace pensions somewhere. You don't know how much it's grown. You don't know where it's invested. Bring it all together and you've got clarity. And then you can start working on a plan.
One of the things to watch out for with those old workplace pensions, as Maike said, is that your workplace might subsidise your pension while you're working there. But when you're no longer working there, you might find the fees go up and that they become more expensive.
Yeah.
So what was cheap while you're employed is no longer so cheap when you're not employed by that company. But the other thing to look out for that you don't want to give up, and this is something that my wife has, interestingly, on one of her old pensions, is she's got an old defined contribution pension and it comes with a guarantee that she can access the pot at 55. So at the moment, you have to wait to 55 to access your pension pot. That's going to go up to 57 soon. But on this one, she's got guaranteed that she can take that pension at 55. And if she moves it and she consolidates it, she's probably going to lose that guarantee.
Yeah. I want to think about now the future, because if you ask a lot of young people, they'll be like, the state pension won't be there. We've already spoken about the changing landscape over the last, in my lifetime. It's beyond recognition. So I wonder what the next 20, 30, 40 years is going to look like. But if you listen to Elon Musk, he says retirement savings are pointless. So should we all just throw up our hands and, I don't know, put money into a savings account and buy a house if you're in your 20s or whatever it is you want to buy?
I think Elon Musk has a different attitude towards working to most of the rest of us.
Yeah.
Just even looking at working hours, work-life balance and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Even putting aside some of the other stuff. So I don't know whether I would listen to his advice on pensions and saving for retirement. I think that people worry about the state pension. People worry about whether they're going to get it. People worry about, if people of my age worry about we're going to get it and we're a lot closer to it than someone in their 20s. I can't see the state pension being removed. I struggle to see the state pension being means tested. There's always those rumours, but there's always the risk that could happen. But there's always the risk that the government could change the rules as well. And that's why I think successive governments need to not change the rules in the way that they have been changing the rules. And we almost need to take pensions out of that political spectrum and lay down we are not going to change the rules. You can trust in this system, so just pay your money in and build your pension.
Getting governments to stay away from pensions, well, good luck with that one, Simon. But we can but dream. My philosophy was always, and maybe this is a freelancer attitude, it's on me. I will just assume I won't get a state pension. Hopefully I will. I've got quite a few qualifying years. But if I just think it's a bonus, a nice to have, rather than an essential, I think it just gives me a bit more impetus now to prioritise my pension savings. Maike, for you, what does the future look like, do you think?
Well, I certainly don't agree with Elon Musk. I think it's really disappointing that someone with all that intellect and all that money spreads such misinformation, because we only need to, and I think Elon Musk only needs to look in the mirror to know the one thing that's not going to change. Technology is going to change our world beyond what we can imagine.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, absolutely. And the jobs we do. But the one thing that's not going to change is look in the mirror, Elon. You are going to get old and you are going to age. And at some point, we all want to scale down. We don't want to work forever. And that needs to be funded. And in the world that we live in today, that's down to us. If you were lucky enough to get the full state pension, that is an income that is not enough to live on comfortably. That's a supplement. So I suspect, and I've seen this, and I think this is a really positive thing, that more and more people are becoming engaged with pensions. More people are getting excited about pensions, and that is a good thing.
Do you know what I love? Going to the football to watch Brentford. I never in my lifetime of being a sports reporter, sports fan, ever thought I'd see a pension company just blasted across the side. I think it's absolutely brilliant. If you had a message for the government, I know what Simon's would be, but what would yours be, Maike, about pensions?
I agree that stop tinkering, but I think if you want to create a nation of investors, which we know the Chancellor wants to do, and there's been some tinkering with the cash ISA to encourage us to invest, that is not going to make us investors. The way to unlock a nation's love of investing is to start with pensions. And if we think of the US and how engaged people are with their 401ks, talk to people about pensions, help people to make that connection that their pension is invested in the stock market and they own a slice of companies like Microsoft, exciting companies. And actually, the more engaged you become with it, the more you can change your financial destiny, because this pot of money is going to fund the longest holiday you'll ever be on, the dreams, the things you always wanted time to do, the people you wanted to support. So I would just say, if you want to turn us all into investors, start with pensions.
I'm going to steal that line, by the way, and tell all my friends
Absolutely.
about the longest holiday you'll ever be on. Doesn't that make retirement sound so much better? We always do, Maike, the £1,000 move. So if I unexpectedly gave you £1,000, what would you do with it?
Well, I wonder what I'm going to do with that, Georgie. You know what? I will put £1,000 into a pension, because you know why? That £1,000 is going to turn into £1,250 without me doing anything. That's a 25% return. If I got that return in any investment, that would be shooting the lights out. So immediately my money has grown, right? And then you say, well, you could put it into an ISA and you could get it out again. But that's the benefit. It's locked away. There's no temptation. And I know it's going to grow over time.
And finally, Simon says,
I would say that for many people, the problem with the pension is that they look at it and they think, if I pay that money in, though, I can't get it out. I've always said the worst thing about pensions is that you pay the money in and you can't get it out. The best thing about pensions is that you pay the money in and you can't get it out.
Yes.
And that stops you from spending it. And that is one of the reasons why you should pay money into your pension and do it early, because you're building up that pot and you cannot get at it until you are much closer to retirement. And one day, future you will say thank you to previous you for doing that. And if we're lucky enough, we'll all have a DeLorean and we can go back and say thanks ourselves.
And of course, one day you'll find yourself stroking your app, taking it to bed at night and singing to it. Thank you, Maike. Thank you, Simon. And thank you for joining us. Remember, if you want to see how much income your pension could generate in retirement, PensionBee have a very helpful online calculator that tells you your pension forecast. The link is in the show notes. If you want to get in touch with us, you can find us on social. You can email us, and remember to hit subscribe so you don't miss an episode. And make sure to tell your friends who don't know their BTCs from their ETFs about us. Before you go, just a quick reminder that everything you've heard on this podcast is for information and education only. It's not personal financial advice. Investing involves risk, and if you're unsure, it's best to speak to a regulated financial advisor. If you enjoy Investing Unlocked, especially our retirement episode, then I think you'll enjoy this from our sponsor PensionBee, the Pension Confident podcast, hosted by Philippa Lamb alongside a panel of financial experts. It's aimed at those who want to understand pensions and personal finance in a bit more depth, but without the jargon. They cover topics like ISAs, mortgages, the bank of mum and dad, as well as how to become a pension millionaire and the cost of divorce. There are new episodes every month, plus bonus content in between. You can listen on all major podcast platforms, in the PensionBee app, or watch on YouTube. Just remember, anything discussed isn't financial advice, and when investing, your capital is at risk. Search the Pension Confident podcast wherever you listen.